how I left my cheating, lazy ex, and watched life completely humble him. I always thought marriage was supposed to feel like a partnership. Like two people rowing the same boat in the same direction. In reality, mine felt like rowing alone while the man supposedly rowing with me sat at the front of the boat, drinking juice, talking about how exhausting life was, and occasionally criticizing the direction I was rowing in. Looking back, it's almost laughable how long I tolerated that version of love. Almost. When we got married, my ex-husband had this attitude that the world owed him something simply for existing. He wasn't always unemployed, but he was always too good for the work that was actually available. If a job didn't pay what he thought he deserved, it wasn't worth his time. If an employer dared to give him constructive feedback, he'd come home fuming about how they didn't appreciate a smart man like him. The irony? Half the time he complained, he wasn't even working. At first, I did everything a supportive wife is supposed to do. I encouraged him. I told him he was capable. I reassured him that slow seasons happen. But slow seasons became normal seasons, and normal seasons turned into long stretches of unemployment where he sat at home playing video games like a teenager on summer break. Meanwhile, I worked long hours, paid bills, cooked dinners, and convinced myself that this was just a rough patch. But the rough patch stretched into years. And with every month that passed, his confidence inflated like a balloon someone forgot to tie. It amazed me how a man who contributed less and less somehow found a way to believe he was more and more important. He spoke like he was the CEO of a multinational corporation, managing intense workloads and making executive decisions. In reality, the only decisions he made involved what to order for lunch and which video game to binge all night. It was the constant contradiction that eventually drove me insane. He had endless time to scroll through his phone, endless time to argue with me, endless time to remind me that I nagged too much, and apparently endless time to cheat. But ask him to fill out a job application? Suddenly, he was overwhelmed. Ask him to clean the kitchen? Suddenly, he was exhausted. Ask him to be a husband? Suddenly, I was being unreasonable. I started noticing the signs of cheating before I ever fully admitted it to myself. He suddenly cared way too much about how he looked when he went out to run errands. His vague explanations for being out late were always accompanied by the same dismissive tone, like I was being dramatic for wondering where my husband was at midnight on a Wednesday. His phone, which had once been casually thrown on the couch or left charging in random places, suddenly never left his hand. He started showering before going out, not after coming home. He started working on himself, even though he had no job to go to. He started smiling at messages he wouldn't let me see. But the biggest sign? He started treating me with a mix of annoyance and arrogance, as if he had already decided I wasn't good enough for him but needed to keep me around for the benefits. The night everything changed was a night I had come home from an especially brutal workday. I walked through the door carrying grocery bags, mentally exhausted, physically drained, and emotionally done. He was sitting on the couch, shirtless, playing his game with his headset on, laughing into the mic with someone. He didn't even pause the game when he saw me. Didn't offer help. Didn't ask how my day was. Just continued his virtual battle while I put away the groceries alone. I asked him if he could at least take out the trash, and he sighed dramatically, paused his game just long enough to say, "I'm busy, can you not nag right now?" Nag. That word had become his favorite. Something inside me cracked that night. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't the dramatic epiphany movies make heartbreak look like. It was quiet. A small, exhausted sigh inside my chest. A whisper that said, "You don't deserve this." A week later, I found the proof messages. Explicit ones. Romantic ones. Plans. Pictures. A woman who thought he was single. A woman he had been seeing for weeks while I was working overtime to keep our house functioning. When I confronted him, he acted irritated. Like I was interrupting his day with nonsense. He tried to blame me. He said I wasn't affectionate enough. He said I'd made him feel small. He said I nagged too much. The excuses came like a waterfall of cowardice. But the best part? He said all of that while unemployed, cheating, and living in a home I paid for. That was the moment I realized I didn't have a husband. I had a grown child disguised as a partner. Leaving him wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was calm. I told him I was done. I packed my things. I walked out. And I felt lighter than I had in years. He didn't think I would actually leave. But I did. And watching his stunned face as I walked out was the first spark of satisfaction I'd felt in a long time. I should have known the divorce process would drag on for months. Actually, years. A man who didn't work and didn't contribute suddenly had all the energy in the world to fight me in court. He filed unnecessary motions. He delayed paperwork. He tried to argue over petty things he didn't even care about. All to spite me. And yet, despite all of this, despite all his arrogance and entitlement, despite all the ways he had failed as a husband, he still carried himself like a man too important for real work. Until life humbled him. And it humbled him beautifully. The same lips he used to kiss me with were the same lips he used to lie, but karma always kisses last. I wish I could say that walking away from him closed the chapter cleanly. It didn't. Leaving him was merely me stepping out of the burning building. The smoke followed me long after. Divorce isn't just a legal process, it's a battlefield. And my ex, unemployed, arrogant, delusional, suddenly discovered a new identity in that courtroom, the victim. He draped himself in victimhood like a costume. Told the judge I abandoned him. Claimed I destroyed his confidence. Said I emasculated him by expecting him to work. He cried, too, tears that were as fake as the promises he used to make me on anniversaries. His attorney fees piled up. Mine did too. Thousands on his side, thousands on mine. All for him to argue over furniture he didn't buy, appliances he never used, and a TV he spent more time screaming at than appreciating. Every hearing drained me. Not just financially, but emotionally. I would walk out of the courthouse with my stomach in knots, feeling hollow, like a ghost following its own footsteps. But the universe has a sick way of balancing the scales. While he was fighting me in court, he wasn't fighting for a future. He wasn't fighting for a job. He wasn't fighting to fix his life. He was fighting to hurt me. And that kind of obsession rots a person from the inside out. I didn't learn how bad things had gotten for him until a friend called me unexpectedly on a Saturday afternoon. I still remember the way her voice cracked slightly, like she was trying not to burst into laughter. "I think you need to hear this," she said. "I just saw your ex. At the grocery store." My stomach tensed. Doing what? Stocking shelves. For a moment, I didn't process it. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone, staring at the floor tiles, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. "Stocking shelves?" I repeated. "Yes," she said, unable to hide the amusement this time. "Blue vest and everything." I closed my eyes. Not because I felt joy yet, the emotion was too big to fit in my chest all at once. It was like someone had whispered the first line of a song I hadn't heard in years, and every memory, every betrayal, every insult came rushing back in a tidal wave of clarity. My ex, the man too important for low-end jobs. The man who looked down on honest work. The man who spent years telling me he deserved better. The man who used unemployment as a lifestyle. The man who cheated on me in his free time. The man who dragged me through the court system to prove he wasn't the failure he knew he was. That man was now stocking cereal boxes on a shelf. Life has timing. And sometimes its sense of timing is hilarious. But the darkness wasn't in what he was doing. It was in what had brought him there. Over the next weeks, I got updates. Not because I asked, but because karma has a way of putting messengers in your path. A mutual acquaintance mentioned that the woman he cheated with had left him when she realized he had nothing to offer except excuses. Another person told me he had been evicted from his apartment after missing payments. Someone else casually mentioned he had been living with a relative in a cramped spare room. The man who once boasted about being meant for greatness was now a cautionary tale wandering around town trying to survive. But the real shift, the truly dark turn, came months later. I had to see him again for one final hearing. The last one. The one that determined the final division of assets and ended our legal entanglement. I had prepared myself for the emotional whiplash of seeing him. But nothing could have prepared me for what walked into that courtroom. He looked like a man unraveling. He had lost weight, not the healthy kind. His clothes didn't fit right. His hair was unwashed. There were bags under his eyes deep enough to hide years of regret. His hands trembled when he signed the papers. And when he looked at me, it wasn't anger anymore. It was desperation. A flicker of the old arrogance tried to surface when he sat down across from me, but the foundation was cracked. His voice shook. His eyes darted. When he spoke, it wasn't with confidence, it was with panic barely hidden under a tone that used to intimidate me. "You're ruining my life," he hissed under his breath. It was almost funny. I had spent years supporting him financially, emotionally, mentally, dragging him through adulthood like he was a stubborn child. And now, after he burned every bridge, betrayed every promise, and mocked every effort I made, I was ruining his life. No. He had done that all on his own. But that wasn't the darkest part. The darkest moment came when he leaned closer, voice shaking, and said, "I thought you'd come back." I felt the world go still. There it was, the root of everything. The arrogance, the games, the cheating, the court battles. He never believed I was truly gone. He thought I'd break under the weight of the divorce. He thought I'd call him after a bad day, begging for peace. He thought I'd resuscitate him emotionally again like I had so many times. He didn't want me, he wanted the safety net I had always provided. But I wasn't a net anymore. I was the blade cutting through the last ropes tying us together. I stared at him, letting silence do the talking. Letting reality settle into his unraveling mind like cold water on a fevered body. He looked away first. He always did. That was the moment I knew the war was already won. The judge finalized everything. I walked out of that courtroom with my chest pounding, the air around me feeling strangely still, like the moment right after a storm ends, when the world is drenched, quiet, and oddly peaceful. But him? He chased me out into the hallway. And the man who once mocked me for being emotional now had tears he couldn't control. "Please," he said quietly. "I can't do this." I didn't say anything. He wasn't talking about the divorce anymore. He meant life. His life. The one falling apart like wet tissue paper. He stood there trembling, everything stripped away. His pride. His persona. The illusion of superiority. All that was left was a man scared of himself. My revenge wasn't something I had to plan. It wasn't something I had to execute. Life took care of it. I had simply stepped aside and let him face the consequences that had always been chasing him. I walked away from him again, but this time, the weight that lifted felt final. Permanent. Like I had finally buried something that had been rotting inside me. His last words as I turned my back echoed through the empty hallway. "I miss who you made me. Not who he was. Not who he could have been. Who I made him." And that was the real tragedy of his life. He never became anything on his own. The darkness in my chest softened, but it didn't disappear. Pain doesn't vanish. It morphs. It reshapes you. And I knew I was different now. Stronger. Sharper. More dangerous to anyone who thought they could ever break me again. Because once you walk through hell, fire doesn't scare you anymore. I once gave him my body and my heart, but watching him lose everything was the first time he ever truly felt me leave. Most stories end with the courtroom scene, papers signed, hands shaken, and each person walking away to rebuild or destroy whatever comes next. But real life doesn't bow politely. It doesn't end on cue. It spills, it bleeds, it drags on in ways you don't anticipate. When I walked out of that courthouse hallway and left him standing there, shaking, pleading, crying, I thought that was the final moment of our twisted history. I thought that was as dark as it would get. But endings have layers. And mine didn't unfold in a single dramatic exit. It came slowly, like dusk swallowing the last light of day. Life moved forward. Not quickly, but forward. I threw myself into work, not as an escape, but as a rewrite. I rebuilt my home, not physically, but emotionally. I redecorated, rearranged, replaced things that held his scent or shadow. I slept better. I breathed easier. The silence didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt earned. But healing isn't linear. Some nights the memories climbed into bed with me. The arguments. The humiliation. The way he used to make me feel small when he had contributed so little. The way he twisted conversations until I doubted my own voice. The way he looked at me like I was a burden, while I carried everything. And then, every once in a while, I'd remember the day my friend told me she saw him stocking grocery shelves, and a strange, bittersweet relief would wash over me. Not joy. Not pettiness. Just closure. He had spent years refusing to work, claiming every job was beneath him. Yet now he was doing the very thing he once mocked. Dark justice has a quiet sound to it, like a door clicking shut. Months passed, and I didn't hear from him. No calls. No messages. No passive-aggressive emails from his lawyer. For the first time in years, he wasn't a ghost haunting my waking hours. He was simply gone. But darkness has a way of circling back. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got another unexpected call. This time from someone I hadn't spoken to in ages, one of his cousins. She wasn't someone I was close to, but she had always been polite, always decent. I answered because curiosity still lives in places trauma used to sit. Her voice was tight. Controlled. Like she was holding something fragile between her teeth. I wasn't sure if I should call you, she said. But I thought, maybe you'd want to know. My fingers tightened around the phone. Know what? It's about him. His name hit me like a stone dropped in deep water, sinking, slow and heavy. He's not doing well, she said. And I don't mean financially. The silence on my end stretched long enough that she filled it. He's been drinking. A lot. Lost his job at the store after missing shifts. His family tried helping, but he's not the same. He's angry all the time. Depressed. He talks about you more than he should. I exhaled, a long, slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. He says you broke him, she added. That was the moment the darkness inside me shifted. Not softer. Not crueler. Just clearer. I didn't break him. I stopped holding him together. There's a difference, a profound one, and it was never more obvious than in that moment. I thanked her for calling. She apologized even though she didn't need to. When the call ended, I stood alone in my living room, phone still in my hand, heart oddly steady. No shaking. No tears. No spikes of guilt or triumph. Just truth. He had always been fragile, but fragile people can still be dangerous when you give them power. And I had given him so much power. Too much. Enough to drain me, warp me, diminish me. Without me, his life didn't fall apart. It revealed itself. A few weeks later, I ran into one of his old friends, someone who clearly felt awkward seeing me but still greeted me politely. We made small talk, the usual pleasantries, until the conversation naturally shifted. I saw him recently, he said, voice lowering. He's not in a good place. I nodded. I heard. He hesitated. I don't think he ever expected you to leave. He thought he'd always have you to land on. I know, I said softly. He's been telling people you ruined him. My lips twitched, not a smile, not sadness. Something in between. He ruined himself. I just walked away. The man nodded, slowly, as if he hadn't expected honesty but appreciated it. That night, I sat on my couch, thinking about how people break for 2 reasons. Because someone destroys them. Or because they were already cracked and you finally stopped taping them back together. He wasn't broken because I left. He was broken because he never stood on his own. And for the first time, I realized the deepest revenge wasn't watching him struggle. It wasn't hearing he had fallen apart. It wasn't knowing he regretted losing me. The deepest revenge was indifference. His life was a storm. A violent, dark, relentless storm. And I had walked out of it. I was safe. Dry. Warm. Living. Growing. Healing. He was still drowning in the rain he created. But life wasn't done teaching him lessons. Another year passed, a beautiful, quiet year for me. I flourished at work. Made new friends. Rebuilt my confidence. Even dated a little. I found joy in the smallest things, morning coffee, fresh sheets, open windows, laughter that felt real again. Then came the final piece of the story. A mutual friend messaged me out of the blue. Did you hear what happened to him? My stomach didn't drop this time. It didn't twist. It didn't react at all. What? He checked into a rehabilitation program. For drinking. For anger issues. For depression. His family pushed him into it. I stared at the message for a long moment. Not because I felt sorry for him. Not because I felt vindicated. But because the story had finally reached its final page. He had always been a man who refused to confront his own flaws. A man who blamed everyone else for the consequences of his choices. A man who built his entire identity on a fantasy of greatness while avoiding effort, responsibility, growth. Now he was trapped facing the version of himself he had avoided his whole life. And I wasn't there to save him. That was the darkest part of the justice. Not that he fell. But that he had to climb out alone, if he ever could. I never checked on him again. I never followed his progress. I never reached out, not even out of curiosity. The chapter was closed so completely it felt like it had been written in stone. Revenge stories often end with someone being humiliated or exposed or punished. But mine ended differently. He lost everything. His pride. His excuses. His illusions. His comfort. His lover. His job. His energy. His stability. His version of me. Not because I destroyed him. But because I stopped being the foundation he stood on. And when weak structures lose their support, they don't collapse dramatically, they crumble slowly, piece by piece, until nothing recognizable remains. Years later, I can finally say it without bitterness, without anger, without joy. He taught me what love shouldn't feel like. Life taught him what consequences do feel like. And both of us became exactly what we were meant to be. I became free. He became accountable. His downfall wasn't tragic. It was inevitable. He once touched my skin like he owned it, but in the end, the only thing he ever embraced was the wreckage he created.